Hello, and welcome to Fostering Connections with the Natural World, a Biophilic Cities webinar series. I'm Amanda Beck, a research associate with the Biophilic Cities project at the University of Virginia. Through this series, we will hear from practitioners and researchers who are creating positive environmental change, are balancing their city's ecological footprint, and are fostering increased connections with urban wildlife. The Biophilic Cities project started at UVA in 2011 to explore and advance nature in cities. In the fall of 2013, the Global Biophilic Cities Network was launched, with partner cities spanning the globe from San Francisco, California, Wellington, New Zealand, Singapore, and more. This series is one of the ways the Biophilic Cities project aims to help share knowledge about the innovative work of cities, organizations, and individuals around the world who are championing biophilic design. To see the full schedule of topics and to register for an upcoming webinar, please visit our website at www.biophilic.cities.org. Today we will hear from Bill Browning, founder of Terrapin Bright Green, LLC. Mr. Browning is active in the biophilic design world as a researcher, author, and consultant for corporations, government agencies, and large-scale developments. As well as his work with Terrapin Bright Green, he was also a founder of the Rocky Mountain Institute's Green Development Services and was a founding member of the U.S. Green Building Council. Today we will be hearing about the ways cities can use biophilic design to enhance the human experience as well as the economic benefits of connecting with nature. Mr. Browning will speak for 30 minutes to be followed by questions from the audience. So I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Bill. You might have to hit the talk button one more time. We can't hear you yet, Bill.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you for inviting us to present our work and that we've been doing in biophilic design. I'm a huge fan of the Biophilic Cities Network and was honored to be a participant in the launch event of the network. And so what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit of our work, first a little bit in the science supporting biophilic design, and then some economic impacts, and then ways of implementing biophilic design with a few examples from cities, largely New York City. And so let's start. So as Amanda said, Terrapin is a small research and consulting firm based in Washington, D.C. and New York City. We work in a number of fields of inquiry. Biophilia is one of them. We also do quite a bit of work in the related field of biomimicry, literally asking how does nature do that. We get hands-on involved in large design projects, both individual buildings, city precincts, and planning projects. We don't act as the designers. We actually help support design teams and owners in determining what are the best environmental strategies for projects. So as a member of the Biophilic Cities Network, or people interested in this, you probably already have a pretty good sense of what biophilia is. For us, we tend to like to think back to Edward O. Wilson's definition, which is a modification of the work of Erich Fromm, the social psychologist, who originally coined the term biophilia. When we think about the early evidence for biophilia and how it impacts people, one of the best pieces early on was Roger Ulrich's work at the University of Texas, where they're looking at recovery from a specific surgery. And the patients were matched by demographics and even by the paint colors of their recovery room. And the most significant variable in determining length of stay in the hospital was what their view was. Half of the patients had a view to a brick wall, the other half had a view to a small clump of trees and shrubs. And the patients who saw the brick wall typically had a recovery period of about 8.3 days, whereas the patients who saw the trees and shrubs recovered in 7.4 days. And in many cases, it took half as many painkillers and had significantly less nursing calls. This study helped launch an intense conversation that's now known as evidence-based design for hospitals, and it's one of the reasons why you see the healing garden movement in hospitals around the world. There's extensive work going on, continuing on this. Dr. Ulrich has joined a team at Chalmers University in Sweden that is doing a lot of work on psychiatric hospitals and recovery in psychiatric situations and also cardiac situations with a connection to nature. When we think about it in an urban environment or a natural environment, the work that Von Park and his team is doing in Japan is quite intriguing, and they don't call it biophilia there, it's called forest bathing, Shin Yuko, and in their experiments they give people a stressful situation, and then the recovery is either walking through the forest or walking down a busy urban street or sitting in the forest, or as this poor individual is doing, sitting on an urban corner. And their measurements of changes in stress within the body are heart rate, blood pressure, and interestingly, measuring salivary cortisol, which is a really good indicator of the endocrine balance within the body and stress levels within the body. Now, what's intriguing that they found in subsequent research from their earlier studies was that those stress levels and the cortisol level actually stays depressed for a significant period of time after the nature exposure. So the exposure to nature isn't just a temporary while you're experiencing it, but you carry the beneficial effects of that exposure with you for a significant period of time afterwards. A lot of the studies on exposure to nature and recovery typically look at a recovery period of 15 minutes, half an hour, or sometimes longer. And that's pretty terrific, but the question then becomes, most people have very busy lives and can't spend 15 minutes to half an hour every day out in nature. What's an optimal exposure? And Barton and Pretty in their work in the UK discovered that actually all you need is 5 minutes to have a significant effect both on self-esteem and on mood. So the prescription now is have at least 5 minutes a day in nature. From the neuroscience side, it's interesting to see how the brain interprets and responds to nature. And so the processing of experiences in nature happens first in the visual cortex, and then semantically processed, or the content is processed in other parts of the brain. But that first processing is particularly intriguing because the visual cortex is shaped like a funnel. And where an image is processed in the visual cortex, the further back it gets, the more mu receptors or opiate receptors that it fires. Now, each time you fire one of these receptors, you get a little burst of opiates in the brain, literally a little chemical burst of pleasure. And so the further back an image makes it in the visual cortex before it leaves to go to other processing, the more mu receptors or opiate receptors are triggered, a more pleasurable response. So looking at these four images, the gray wall on the upper left doesn't have a lot of content visually. And so it gets processed very rapidly in the forward part of the visual cortex. The pile of bricks is a little more interesting. It makes it a little further back. The street scene which doesn't have any plants or people in it, but has indications that people are around, is more interesting to us and a little more visually complex, and so that makes it further back in the visual cortex. The view of the garden, on the other hand, makes it all the way to the back of the visual cortex and triggers the largest amount of opioid receptors, the largest pleasure response. What's also intriguing in the work that Biederman and Vessel have done is that the images elicit different responses after you've seen them the first time. The first time you see the pile of bricks, it's somewhat interesting, but once you've seen it once, each subsequent time you look at it, it becomes less and less interesting. That effect does not occur with the scene of nature. That stays pretty much as intense a pleasure response the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh time that you view that image as your original experience. So the question then becomes, is simulated nature good enough? Can we just give people a picture of nature, and will that be sufficient? And there's been work on showing patients images of nature before they go into or just coming out of surgery and finding that surgical recovery is greatly enhanced. Stress level, blood pressure, heart rate, all of that go down significantly when viewing that image of nature. So the question that Peter Kahn and his research team at the University of Washington asked was, is simulated nature enough? So they gave people the stress situation and then the recovery, and they asked them questions to gauge psychological response, and also they monitored heart rate and blood pressure to see the physiological response. In the recovery period, there were one of three conditions. The first was all the gray drapes drawn and no view. The second was a view out window where you can see this fountain, the trees, the plantings, so a view to man-made, but still a view to nature. The third was actually what you're seeing here, which is a flat screen television of the same dimensions as an aspect as the window, and broadcast live real time onto that was the view out the window. The simulated view was definitely both psychologically and physiologically better response than the no view at all, which is not a huge surprise. But what was really intriguing was while the psychological response to the simulated view was very, very positive and was pretty much the same as the real view, the physiological response, on the other hand, was significantly different, in that the real view to nature elicited a much stronger blood pressure and heart rate drop than the simulated. Now, we've asked optical scientists and neuroscientists why this reaction. And what we have been told by a number of them is that because human vision is binocular and the effect of parallax, all you need to do is move your head even a fraction of a centimeter and what you see three-dimensionally changes in the real world. But when you're looking at even the best high-definition flat-screen television, no matter what angle you look at it, that image is the same. And the brain processes that differently and knows the difference between the real and the simulated. Now, why is this important? Well, particularly if we think about office environments where most people spend 80 or more % of their time. When we think of the cost of an office, we typically think about rent or coming from a green building background. We think about the energy issues, but the real cost of the office is the people. So their salaries, benefits, absenteeism, presenteeism, all of those things factor into the cost of that office. And so using biophilic design to improve people's health, well-being, and productivity is a really, really important tool. Now, coming from a green building background, you would think, okay, so we have a LEED gold building here, a call center done for a municipal utility. And in this call center, people are in workstations up on the second floor with a wall of windows looking out to some trees and a field beyond that. And the building has all the features that you would expect of a really good green building. Fantastic quality daylight. They have good lighting design, good air quality, and the ability for everyone to adjust their own airflow and temperature by adjusting that register on the floor, because it's one of those per workstation. However, in that setting, as originally configured, all of the desks were perpendicular to the window. So while you had the window nearby and the view outside, you were pretty much focused on your computer screen, and you literally had to turn your desk or turn your chair or turn your head to see the view to the outside. And so as a result, while there was fantastic daylight and really good green building, the people were pretty much focused on a short, narrow visual focus on their computer screen. The researchers wondered if the view to nature would have more impact than some of the other measures, green building measures, on productivity. And so what they did was come in for about $1,000 per workstation and move the desk at an angle such that out your peripheral vision now, you could see the movement of the leaves, you could see the trees, you could see birds, you could see butterflies in your peripheral vision. Now, it's important to note that in humans, we are much, much more sensitive to movement in the peripheral vision than we are movement straight in front of us. Or as one environmental psychologist said to us, that's the effect of, it's the lion that jumps out from beside you that eats you, not the one that's sitting obviously in front of you. And so as a result, we respond much quicker to movement in that. And that movement gets our attention, gets us to look away from the computer screen just briefly. Now, that also elicits a physiological response, because when we're staring at a computer screen, our visual focus is in the 1 meter or less range. At this range, the lens is rounded. To round the lens of the eye, the muscles in the eye have to contract. We can only hold that contraction for so long before we start getting fatigued and eye strain. If we hold it for a really extended period of time, eventually the muscles give up and the lens hardens into that shape. So then, after you've been staring at a computer screen for hours, when you get up to go leave the building and drive, your vision is actually compromised because your lens is still somewhat stuck in that short visual focus. So the way that you get visual relief and the way that you relax the eye is to have a distant view. And so that's a view that's 30 meters or more away. But even a view that's 7 meters away will get you out of that short visual focus. But anything that is from 30 meters or beyond is the infinite visual focus, and the eye, the lens completely flattens for that, and it does it by all the muscles in the eye relaxing. So by making this simple shift of moving the office furniture, the processing ability of the folks in that call center increased by 6%, which was a return of nearly $3,000, or a 299% return on investment. So we see lots of evidence, and we published a paper several years ago called The Economics of Biophilia, in which we looked at access and views to nature and how that played out. And so things like shortened hospital stays, increased productivity, increased retail sales in shopping streets that had trees, increased property values on the same hillside with a view to a lake down below. The houses that had a view, no view to the water on that hillside were the baseline. The houses that, excuse me, that had the view to the lake were 58% more expensive per square foot. So we see this playing out again and again. So if this is important, the question then is, how do we capitalize that both in a building and an urban setting? And what we realized from all this research is that we could develop a series of design patterns that really fell into three major categories. The first is nature in the space. And this is direct exposure or indirect exposure to nature in your space. The second are natural analogues, things that evoke nature but may not necessarily be alive or actual nature. And the third is the nature of the space itself. And these are spatial configurations that elicit both psychological and physiological response in us in the built environment and in the natural environment. So within those three categories, there are 14 different patterns. And so I'm going to go through some of those patterns quickly here. The first category here is nature in space. And you can see there's 7 patterns within that. Visual connection is sort of the most obvious of those patterns, and that's literally having a view to nature, either inside the building. It could be an aquarium, it could be a clustered planting inside, it could be a green wall, could be a bird cage, it may be any of those things, or it can be a view to nature outside. Because a lot of the audience for this set of patterns are designers, and we find that designers, like most humans, tend to default first to the visual. And much of the sensory processing of the brain is devoted to vision. But we find that when you combine senses and experiences of senses, the reaction is much, much stronger. And so combining sight with sound, sight with touch, or smell and touch, or taste, putting those senses together elicits a much, much stronger beneficial response. And if we want to get people's attention and we want them to have these experiences, we need to do it in a way that provides a stimulus that gets your attention even just briefly. And what we've discovered is that stimulus cannot be something that's repeating and predictable. If it's something like a pendulum, we'll look at a pendulum briefly, but after a while we tend to ignore that because it's the same motion all of the time. Or if it's a repeating sound that you hear again and again and again, it either gets annoying or it's something that we tune out. So you need to have unpredictable and non-rhythmic movement or other experiences. So things like this is a art installation by the artist Ned Kahn of little metal discs on the outside of this parking deck. And those ripples that you see is the pattern of wind moving across that building. And it changes dramatically from second to second, minute to minute, and it's never predictable what it will be next, never the same. In the natural environment, it's very, very unusual to find a place that throughout this space the temperature is exactly uniform all throughout that space, or that the air is moving in the same amount or pattern and all that through the space. And what we unfortunately tend to do in buildings is try to make everything uniform temperature, uniform humidity, uniform airflow. And we rarely achieve that, and we've kind of come to believe that if you actually did achieve that, you'd probably wind up putting everyone to sleep in the space. We need the stimulus. And so it's one of the reasons why, for instance, in Japan, you will see mechanical systems that mimic breezes. Both fans and air handling systems will sometimes suddenly push a breeze through space. The Japanese will even introduce trace amounts of scent into mechanical systems to just to stimulate you a little bit and keep you awake and aware. Similarly, the surfaces that you have around you, inside and outside, have different radiant and conductive qualities. And even though they may be the same temperature, a piece of metal at the same temperature as a piece of wood, the metal may be perceived as much colder or much hotter because of its conductance. And so having that variability both in airflow and thermal performance is really important. And we've actually seen experiments and work done by the University of Oregon that shows the classrooms that have a variability of temperature and airflow within the same classroom, the students do much better in those spaces than they do if you got them close to uniform. So here's an example of some of the patterns in use. One of the patterns is the presence of water. And this is Paisley Park, which was designed in 1969. It's one of the most heavily used parks in Manhattan. It's a tiny, tiny space. And you see a whole series of different patterns occurring within this space. And the predominant one we've discovered is actually the presence of water, because there may be lots of different things going on in that space, but the only time that we ever see the space really unoccupied is when the water feature is not on. And so what we find is when you start combining patterns, the response and the experience is much, much stronger. But even when you combine a bunch of patterns, typically one or two are going to be the ones that are the major determinants of the experience of that space. And what was intriguing, and to give you a sense of how powerful that experience is, this was from a couple summers ago where half of the park was blocked because we were doing construction work on an adjoining wall to the park. And even so, even with that going on, the park was still filled with people. So presence of water. If the water is moving, it elicits a much stronger response, and it needs to be clean water. It doesn't have to be completely clear and pure, but it needs to be perceived as relatively clean. Just as variability in temperature is important, variability in light is important as well, both inside and outside. So having dynamic lighting conditions, having diffuse light, having distinct shadows, having a variety of lighting conditions within a similar space turns out to be really important. We're also learning more and more about circadian lighting, which is the physiological response to the changes in the color of daylight over the course of the day. In the morning, sunshine is yellow. It shifts to blue in midday, and then becomes reddish in the late afternoon. That blue light is very, very important, particularly in the bandwidth of 480 to 500 nanometers, that is the bandwidth that triggers the shift between melatonin and serotonin in the human body. And so Fraunhofer Institute, Lighting Systems, and a number of other researchers are looking at the impact of adjusting with LED light, how that impacts our serotonin-melatonin balance and can keep us active and dynamic over the course of the day, but also not keep us up late at night. Because if you get a bunch of blue light late at night, you're wiping out the melatonin in the body and making it much harder to go to sleep. One of the more intriguing patterns for us is really an experiential pattern. And this is a connection with natural systems, seeing how things change over time, seeing a connection to nature. So this is a green roof that we installed with our sister organization, Cook Fox Architects, on the roof of a building in the middle of Manhattan. And this is actually the view from the desks in that office. About 70 people have this view, looking out the windows, and the roof is right up at the level of the windows, so they look out from their desks across this roof and see the seasonal changes. Now, what was interesting about the experience of this was that when we first put the roof in and we watched the species change and the seasons and the color change, that experience was largely an aesthetic experience that was decorative, beautiful and decorative. Over time, we started noticing insects coming in and colonizing the roof. And then dragonflies hunting the other insects. And then we started to see small birds using the roof as habitat. And then finally a pair of kestrels, small hawks, took up the roof as hunting territory as well. And one day one of them caught a bird and ate it right outside the window. Some people were horrified. Everyone was enthralled. And regardless of the reaction, whether they liked that experience or not, it shifted everybody's perception of that roof. That connection to place became much, much deeper and much, much stronger because now the roof wasn't just decorative. The roof had actually now become an ecosystem. Subsequently, the office added a beehive up there, and the actions and the behaviors of the bee became something that people became very, very engaged in as well. So connection to natural systems. Now, there are work by a nonprofit in New York City has looked at how much roof area would be available for rooftop agriculture. And it's approximately 1,200 hectares of rooftop would be available for rooftop farming all throughout New York City. Now, that's a lot of land. That's a lot of area, but it's only going to feed a few hundred families. So in terms of the food supply for New York City, having rooftop farms and rooftop gardens all over the place really is just a tiny drop in the bucket. The true value of that is that it connects people to place, and it connects them to the experience of agriculture, and it connects them to the experience of food production and growth and natural cycles. And so that is actually the real true benefit of these rooftop gardens throughout New York City. And we're seeing more and more of them. And in fact, the city has now changed the building code to allow, if you put a commercial greenhouse on your roof, it does not count into the FAR equation for the scale of your project. So, natural analogs. These are representations of nature. These are not direct nature, but there are things that remind us of nature, and the brain associates with the experience of nature. For example, natural materials. While those stones are no longer part of the earth, we still see them as being natural and still see them as being connected to nature. Just as there's a very strong preference for wood in interiors, which we know is no longer a tree, but the brain still processes it as being connected to nature, as opposed to the metal and glass that you see down below, which the brain processes in a different place than it processes experiences of nature, and so the brain separates man-made from natural. We also have a very, very strong preference for fractals. When you look at traditional architecture, particularly religious architecture around the world, but a lot of indigenous architecture around the world, what you will find is they exhibit fractal patterns or fractal relationships that tend to go to the third iteration, as you can see in this fractal gasket here. So you start with a square, you erode it once, and you wind up with the first pattern, the first iteration. Erode it again, you wind up with the second, and then the third. And what the brain scientists are finding is the third order is the one that interests the most. Now, unfortunately, most modern architecture never gets beyond having the first or the second order. Rarely do we see modern architecture get to the third order, which is really, really unfortunate. The other intriguing things about fractals, if the fractals are moving, we are just like moths to a flame. And so when you think about, why is it that we will sit and watch waves for very long periods of time, or we'll sit and watch fire in a fireplace, that's because our brain is hardwired for that. We are really, really intrigued by the experience. So the final category is the nature of the space itself. And there are 4 patterns within this. And this is work that originated with J. Appleton and landscape geographers in the UK, asking why is it that certain views within a certain landscape are preferred over others? Are there evolutionary benefits that we can see that would explain that experience? So the first of those patterns is prospect. And prospect is an unimpeded view through a space. It's incredibly important for wayfinding. It reduces fear, and it also reduces stress. Now, this is a very pure prospect view. It does have water elements, and you can see out to water. This view would become stronger if you then had shade trees and other natural elements in it as well, but it's still effective as a pure prospect view, even in a totally man-made environment. The reverse condition is refuge. This is where our back is protected. This is where we have a canopy overhead. When you think about a park setting and research done, for instance, in Prospect Park, one of the Olmsted parks in Brooklyn, the preferred place, the people that people will tend to put their blankets down the most, is right under the edge of the canopy around the Great Meadow. So they have the view out across the whole meadow, but their backs are protected by the trees there, and they have the shade and the overhang canopy of the trees along that edge. And so that's the condition in a park setting where you have prospect and refuge together. Other classic examples would be things like the booths on a plinth around the perimeter of a restaurant, Or think about a classic bungalow house where you have the raised front porch that's sheltered by the large overhang of the roof. That gives you prospect and refuge together. Mystery is also a really intriguing and fun pattern. This one occurs in a variety of settings, and it, you know, when you think about when you're walking through the path in the forest and that path curves a little bit, and you've got kids with you, inevitably the kids will take off running out in front of you to go see what's around that corner. And the neuroscientists say that there's actually a very, very strong brain reaction to the mystery condition. We also love risk peril. Now, obviously, this is a pattern that you only want to use occasionally, but it's still a pretty fun one. It's an exhilarating experience. There's implied danger here, but you're not really in danger. So thinking about that in an urban setting, here is the Heinlein, which is the old raised elevated railroad system that ran through the Chelsea and meatpacking districts on the west side of Manhattan, that was then later converted into this linear park. And so it has a variety of conditions on it. It has visual connection to nature. It has great prospect views, but there are a few places like this sort of space up on the upper right where in this case you're looking down, and those are glass windows, and you're looking down at the street below you, and when you're sitting there, the cars and the buses seem to emerge from underneath your feet. And it's a little scary and a little daring feeling, and kind of exhilarating. And so there's an experience of risk peril in this outdoor setting. So here's a listing of the patterns again. And you don't need to copy them all down, because if you'd like to read more about them and all of that, you can download these papers, The Economics of Biophilia or the 14 Patterns of Biophilic Design, from the Terrapin website, no charge, and you can download them in a variety of different electronic and PDF formats, including you can download them to your Kindle if you want to read them on your Kindle as well. So thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks for joining us today. I think this was a really great start to the month of February, getting to hear about all the mental, physical, environmental, just all-around benefits of having a stronger connection with nature in cities. So we do have plenty of questions. One person wanted to know, what ways can cities work on designs that enhance biophilic sounds?
Okay, sure. So cities themselves can do a number of things, and typically a lot of the measures that you would do to help improve the biophilia of a place also have other benefits. So street trees are really, really helpful, and we've seen even, for instance, example of street trees enhancing retail sales on a shopping street, and enhancing property values in other places. A number of cities are doing rain gardens and expanded tree well plantings along streetscapes to deal with stormwater issues, but that also brings in the ability to have biodiversity and habitat there and make that further connection to nature, providing bird habitat and butterfly habitat. We see projects that take it further, like Tanner Springs Park in Portland, Oregon, and Potsdamer Platz in Berlin, both of which have extensive water features that people interact with and play in they're actually the stormwater control systems for those sites. The water's cleaned up in small constructed wetlands, so the water is clean enough that people can swim or interact in it. But these are actually stormwater control systems, and they're designed by an artist named Herbert Dreiseidel, whose medium of art is actually stormwater. And there's a couple terrific books called Waterscapes about his work.
What are some new and upcoming projects you know of that are implementing some of these research findings and principles?
Well, one of our clients who has supported a lot of our work, and we actually developed a set of metrics specifically for their buildings and their campuses, is Google. And Google is in the process of rolling out a series of metrics for their buildings and their campuses related to biophilic design that they're going to be applying to both inside their buildings and to the public spaces outside their buildings in cities around the world. So that would be one place right away. There are, of course, great existing examples that we would say of biophilic design all over the world, where people have intuitively been using these patterns for a very long time. So to turn that around rather than sort of new projects, one of the things that we've been doing with some support from Gail Brager at the University of California and her students, and some students at the University of Vermont, and maybe some students starting soon at Drexel and a couple other places, is that we created a template for people to go out and take a look at a place that they really love, and take a listing of the 14 patterns with them and look at that place and figure out which of the patterns may be occurring there and which of those patterns are the ones that make that experience so terrific. And what we hope to do over time is collect those case studies and create an online database that anyone can access to get examples from buildings and from urban design and park design and landscape design of applications of biophilic design. I'd also, if folks have not seen it, the Harvard Center for Health and the Global Environment, which is part of the School of Public Health, did with Radcliffe a really fantastic piece of looking at public health issues in biophilia. And that was published about a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago. And that's available from the Harvard Center for Health and the Global Environment website.
Great. I know as a master's student, being able to find good model organizations, cities, and projects is sometimes challenging. So it's really good to hear about all these different organizations and cases that are using these principles. Do you think there are biophilic designs which can produce high participation rates across different nationalities, cultures, and genders? Maybe sort of the penultimate sort of biophilic design that gets as many people as connected to nature as possible.
Well, for us, one of the reasons that we really focused on biophilic design is realizing that as humans become a more and more urban species, we really need to pay attention more and more to connecting people with nature and biophilic design. So it's not the, it doesn't, biophilic design is parallel to other efforts in sustainable design. And so in some ways it's an additional tool. We do need to be paying attention to energy issues. We need to be paying attention to water issues. And we can do that hopefully in concert with biophilic design. And we're seeing fantastic biophilic design projects emerge all over the world. And firms even some design firms like WOA in Singapore, who pretty much all of their work incorporates sky gardens and shared outdoor spaces connected across multiple settings in buildings as high as 79 stories tall. For instance, a residential complex in Bangkok that they did. So we're seeing a lot of good work in Europe around this topic. The work in Singapore, that we're seeing this happen all over the place.
Do you know of any interesting projects involving multiple rooftop spaces, perhaps bridging 2 rooftops or multiple buildings across a district?
Sure. Well, you know, the Heinlein, of course, is one of the classic examples, and the viaduct in Paris, which predates the Heinlein, would be fantastic examples. If you look at some of WOA's projects in Singapore and other places, they're doing that on a very large scale as well. So those would be 2 good places to look. Mori Development in some of their projects in Tokyo has done that, extending connected sky gardens or sort of patches of sky gardens across multiple buildings, and including even doing little rice paddies on some of those roofs to do a little urban agriculture, but also more to get people connected in. So yes, the question on who is the stormwater artist is Herbert Dreisaitl, correct.
Do you think sustainability can be achieved in the built environment by following biophilic design, or does it need to be a multidisciplinary approach?
It really needs to be a multidisciplinary approach. Biophilic design is really important for our health and well-being, and we hope, our sincere hope, and actually you see this with Google as well, is that biophilic design connects us stronger to places and makes us love places and take care of them, and understand and appreciate the ecosystem of places. And so the hope is that that will help support an environmental ethic. Biophilic design on its directly does not necessarily address the energy issues or water issues or material issues and all of that. So those are all components of sustainable design that we need to continue to focus on, and biophilia is a way to hopefully make those green buildings more loved and more beautiful.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Bill, for joining us today. It was a really wonderful talk. We appreciate you presenting all this information. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Amanda, and the Biophilic Cities Network.
You can join us next week, next week after next, Wednesday, February 18th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, when we will hear from Megan Draheim and Stella Tournay about creating a more biophilic Washington, D.C. Enjoy the rest of your day.